said at one point that you saw a jump in performance. Do you have metrics for that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Thankfully.
yeah, we definitely do. I mean, our metrics come in terms of our growth, comes in terms of our net income, comes in terms of our employee attrition rates. So growth jumped, net income jumped, our attrition rate dropped. Our Q1, Q2 last year was not a great performance. It was fine, but it wasn't great. Q3 started to be really good. Q4, fantastic. Q1 this year, phenomenal. And so when you look at kind of what happened to us as a company and what we walked through is we didn't get smarter, we got better. And how we got better is we learned how to work with one another and how to engage with one another in a very different set of ways. And that's the professional metrics, Daniel.
Yeah.
Months ago is my daughter sitting around the dinner table said, "Dad, you're better to be around." And that's the first time in a long time I heard my daughter say that, right? Which is, you're just better to be around. And the reality is that, you know, I learned a lot about myself after about 6 to 7 months of this pandemic.
Wow.
Is how to socially and emotionally adjust my attitude across the board. You can directly correlate the outcomes of the business. Economically, things didn't change radically. So what did change? It's our approach in terms of how we were operating, how we were thinking about things, how we were engaging with our employees, and kind of going through that learning curve.
I don't know what the course is. Tell me about it.
So I sit in a role, and I think my leaders are pretty open as well, where people could be pretty honest about, I'm dying here, whether it's homeschooling with my kids or women leaving the workforce to do majority of homeschooling. And so what I did was create a program. It was just who's struggling and wants to jump into this swamp with me and figure out how we get out of it together. And what they had to do was watch 6 hours of a show called Chef's Table on Netflix. It's a show where they follow entrepreneur restaurateurs and owners that have been wildly successful. So what it does is it follows the journey of these folks from when they were, where's your passion? What inspired you? How many times did you think you were going to quit? It shows how passion shows up in the beauty of their food and how that passion differentiates them in the industry. And so I picked 6 shows that every single person had some major challenge in their life. The big thing I said is when we come to talk about it, they had 2 other assignments: 0 distractions, no Slack, no reading email while we're all on the phone, no going off camera. And if so, you don't get to come. You're going to earn the right to be present, to listen. There's probably going to be emotion in this thing, and you're going to know why. If someone's telling a story that's hard for them and you're like, I gotta go, I gotta Slack, it's not gonna work. So I love the fact that I could try to teach, especially younger people in Silicon Valley, you really want to solve a problem, stop being distracted. We live in a distracted world. We give you distracting tools. This isn't how you get through this pandemic. Then the next thing they had to prep for was come in and pick one story that shaped them in their life. I didn't say the most, but I said it had to change who you are or how you make decisions. Then the next one was, what's your story? I knew people needed to talk, and I know we have a good culture that's pretty trusting. They got one slide. That was the only time we had a slide, and it could be a picture of what you're talking about. Because as you probably know, what we all know, something that changed your life, sadly, was very rarely something great. It was some sort of character builder, some sort of finding optimism in the fear of failure, powering through, leaning on others, being self-aware of where you are and what you need. It was an extremely emotional couple of hours. In fact, so much so I really screwed up in my first design. When you give people this space, and I learned this from a mentor of mine who built Toyota University, everybody wants to talk about themselves. Everyone wants to be heard. Everyone has challenges. Yes, cultural differences are different. You create the right space, they will step into it, including Japanese engineers. So if I can do it, you can do it. We've since added a little more time, still not an hour, but they have enough time to kind of compose themselves if it's been tough. So that's the last piece, is the going forward. So what's your story? Now share that with everybody. What do you need from us? Is your story in your head the same as if someone was to ask about you? Would they tell the story that you'd like them to tell about you? And I was thrilled that when my first cohort, my brave guinea pig, said, why is this only 5 hours? It should be all day. And I
Okay.
was like, because everyone says nothing should be more than an hour. And it was funny. Someone said, yeah, that's boring content. This is fascinating. I haven't looked at my phone. How do you measure the success of this? And I went to some of the folks in the chef's table class that one sentence said they were transformed. So I went back and said, how does this fit for you? And he said, for the first time working in a company, and he's over 50, I'll leave it at that, said, I can bring all of me to work. I can rip the mask off and be who I am, and I've never been allowed to do that. We have an engineer who will remain nameless, everybody probably knows who it is, who I love working with, who would not be your stereotypical person who would have signed up or anyone would have thought for this crazy program where you watch TV for 6 hours, watch these chefs and come back and tell your life story. And he did. And it was within a week of going through it and talking about how it worked. He was so interested in how'd you get people who don't know each other to sort of then in the middle cry, to then in the end say, we're best friends and are going to help each other in a 6-hour period. And we talked about it. And within a week, he started a program and said, I want to do leadership through movies. It's my passion, as opposed to, again, classroom teaching. Is that okay? And I was like, well, of course, I just did it through Chef's Table. That's the goal. Through art, through music. I don't care what it is, whatever makes you the most comfortable. And he started a program where every week now, a bunch of passionate people about movies come and they pick the movie and then they talk about it in the spirit of leadership. So there's someone who isn't in training, who isn't in leadership, who's an amazing engineer, is now taking a new group in and saying, let's look at leadership through this lens that I like, that you're like, and we can then connect over different things. So that happened within a week of him going through the session. And I just think it's a way, Brad and myself and the executive team can create that, but it's really creating the space to let them know what they're supposed to do, give them the space to do it in their own way that I'm probably most proud of.
When people tell their stories going forward, do they explicitly or implicitly talk about meaning or purpose?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
That's almost everybody's story, right? Why did they get into leadership? Why are you still there? Do you still want to be? And I opened this up to non-people managers. So I say anyone can lead. And by the way, majority of our work at OneLogin is collaborative. So everybody has to lead at some time, whether they report into you or not. So it was reminding us why we're here.
The important point here too in that question, Daniel, is the context for what was going on at the time, which is the pandemic was happening. Everybody was moving to this work from home, remote work situation, regardless of the types of business. And I talked about this a lot with customers. What was the first reaction of all companies, ourselves included, was focus on the technology and tools. Get Zoom out there, get everybody on these communications channels, get new technologies that maybe we weren't utilizing to the best extent before, and get it out there and get it in people's hands. Ourselves, as well as I think a lot of other businesses out there, certainly a lot of our customers experienced the same thing, which is it didn't help. Traditionally, we're taught as leaders and we're encouraged as leaders from our legal teams to our HR teams to others as, hey, don't get personally involved with your employees. Separate the personal persona from the professional persona. Now, the separation of these personas, you couldn't make happen. And I think that's part of it that's not going to change as we go forward as part of people's stories, is that as leaders, you've got to encourage the connection between your personal life stories and your professional direction going forward. And you've got to be a part of it. You've got to be part of engaging that, whether that's through the social issues and having a point of view or driving them forward. But the second insight was that how do you engage? What was clearly the problem was not the tools, not the technology, not the data, not all the IQ elements to make you smarter, but the social elements and the emotional elements of, hey, I'm failing here, I need help, or socially, is I rely on my relationships with other people, and I have none of those. You can't get that through a Zoom video call. And so how do you start to make these connections for employees, the social connections, the emotional outlets, and also encourage them to let it be known that what's happening in their personal lives is part of their professional story and their professional lives, and we get it, we understand it as a company, as a team going forward, and we're going to encourage this mixing as we go forward. And that's when you start to see the performance change.